Noah Carter's quiet life as a farmer takes a devastating turn when he's humiliated by the local bank manager in front of the entire town. But when a mysterious inheritance changes everything, Noah is faced with a choice that could not only save his farm but also transform the entire community. How will he use this newfound fortune to rewrite his story and the lives of those around him? Stay tuned to find out, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more inspiring stories. Let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. The old wooden floor of the Carter farmhouse creaked under Noah's boots as he paced back and forth, a letter clenched tightly in his calloused hands. His jaw was set, his dark eyes fixed on the worn words that had consumed his thoughts for weeks. The bank demanded payment in full, and there was no way he could meet their terms. Years of drought, rising costs, and falling crop prices had squeezed every drop of hope from the land he called home. His farm, his family's legacy, was slipping through his fingers. "Noah, you'll be late if you keep worrying like that," his wife, Clara, called from the kitchen, her voice strained but steady. She was standing by the stove, stirring a pot of grits for breakfast, the aroma mingling with the faint scent of lavender she used to keep the house fresh. "I know," Noah muttered, tucking the letter into his jacket pocket. He stopped to kiss Clara on the cheek, his lips brushing against her weathered skin. She smiled faintly, though her eyes betrayed the same worry that weighed on him. He stepped outside, his boots crunching against the gravel path. His truck, an old but dependable Chevy, was parked under the shade of an oak tree. The once vibrant fields surrounding their home now looked tired and sparse, a mirror to his own dwindling spirit. Noah climbed into the cab, the seats worn leather soft beneath him, and started the engine. The rumble was a small comfort, a reminder of the things that still worked in his life. The drive into town was quiet, save for the hum of the engine and the occasional bark of a stray dog wandering by the roadside. As the bank's brick building came into view, Noah gripped the steering wheel tighter. It wasn't just about the money, it was about pride. This town had seen him as the black farmer for years, the one who worked harder than most but somehow always came up short in their eyes. Parking his truck on Main Street, Noah stepped out and adjusted his hat, shielding his face from the midday sun. He could feel the stares from passers-by, their murmurs soft but cutting. Some nodded politely, others whispered behind their hands. He ignored them and walked through the bank's glass doors. The interior was cool and sterile, with rows of counters manned by clerks who barely looked up as he entered. At the far end of the room stood Mr. Thompson, the bank manager, his rotund frame leaning casually against a desk. He was chatting with a woman dressed in pearls and a tailored dress, laughing loudly enough to draw attention. "Mr. Carter," Thompson called out, his tone overly cheery but laced with condescension. "What brings you in today?" "I'm here to talk about the loan," Noah replied, his voice steady. He walked up to the desk and removed his hat, holding it in front of him like a shield. Thompson's smile faltered. "Ah, yes. The matter of your outstanding debt." He glanced at the woman beside him, who smirked before walking away. "Follow me." Noah trailed Thompson to his office, the door clicking shut behind them. The room was lined with mahogany shelves and polished awards, each one gleaming with an air of self-importance. Thompson sat down behind his oversized desk, gesturing for Noah to take the seat opposite him. "I've reviewed your file," Thompson began, sliding a folder across the desk. "It's not looking good. You're several months behind, and frankly, your farm's valuation doesn't justify extending the terms any further." Noah swallowed hard, keeping his emotions in check. "I just need a little more time. I've got a plan to turn things around." Thompson held up a hand, silencing him. "It's not about plans, Carter. It's about numbers. And yours just don't add up." The words hit like a punch to the gut. Noah's hands clenched the brim of his hat as he fought to stay composed. "There must be some way we can work this out." Thompson leaned back, a smug grin spreading across his face. "I could buy the farm from you. Pennies on the dollar, of course. But let's face it, you're in no position to negotiate." The room seemed to shrink around Noah. He felt the weight of generations pressing on his shoulders, the whispers of his ancestors urging him not to give up. He stood abruptly, towering over Thompson. "This farm is my family's legacy. I won't sell it for nothing." Thompson shrugged, unimpressed. "Suit yourself. But don't say I didn't offer." Noah turned and walked out, his heart pounding. As he stepped back into the sunlight, the whispers of the townsfolk seemed louder than ever. He climbed into his truck, his hands trembling as they gripped the wheel. The fight wasn't over, not yet. But for the first time, doubt crept in, threatening to drown the resilience that had always kept him afloat. The bell above the bank's door jingled as Noah Carter walked out, his steps slow and heavy. Each breath he took seemed to echo the whispers of the townsfolk who lingered along Main Street. Their glances lingered on him longer than usual, eyes filled with a mix of pity and disdain. He adjusted his hat and straightened his back, forcing himself to appear unaffected, though inside, shame churned like a storm. "Noah," a familiar voice called. He turned to see his neighbor, Thomas Reed, waving from across the street. A wiry man with a kind smile, Thomas ran a small hardware store and had always treated Noah with respect. But today, Noah wasn't in the mood for casual conversation. "Morning," Thomas, Noah said with a nod, continuing toward his truck. Thomas jogged over, wiping his hands on his apron. "You all right, Noah? Look like you've seen a ghost." Noah hesitated, debating whether to confide in him, but shook his head. "Just a long day is all." Thomas frowned but didn't press further. "Well, if you need anything, you know where to find me." Noah managed a weak smile before climbing into his truck. The engine roared to life, a stark contrast to the quiet turmoil in his mind. He drove away from Main Street, his grip on the steering wheel tight enough to make his knuckles ache. Halfway down the road, the humiliation hit him in full force. He pulled over near an empty field, resting his head against the steering wheel. The memory of Mr. Thompson's smug smile and mocking tone replayed in his mind like a cruel record stuck on repeat. "This farm is my family's legacy. I won't sell it for nothing." He clenched his fists, the words he'd spoken earlier feeling more like a plea than a declaration. How had it come to this? His father had worked tirelessly to pass the farm down, and his grandfather before him. They had fought against the odds, battled prejudice and systemic obstacles to hold on to their land, and now it was slipping through his fingers. The rumble of another vehicle brought Noah back to the present. He sat up and glanced in the rearview mirror. A shiny blue sedan pulled up behind him, the kind that only wealthier folks in town could afford. He recognized it immediately. Evelyn Price, one of the town's more outspoken residents, stepped out, her heels clicking against the pavement. Dressed in a cream-colored suit and clutching a designer handbag, she looked as if she had stepped out of a magazine. Her lips curled into a smirk as she approached Noah's truck. "Well, if it isn't Noah Carter," she said, her tone dripping with faux concern. "Everything all right, dear? It's not every day you pull over in the middle of nowhere." Noah's jaw tightened. "Just taking a moment, Ms. Price." She tilted her head, her perfectly coiffed hair barely moving. "Taking a moment, are we? I saw you leaving the bank earlier. Guessing Mr. Thompson didn't have good news." Noah didn't respond, but his silence only seemed to embolden her. "It's such a shame," she continued, leaning against his truck door. "Your farm used to be quite the gem back in the day. I remember when your father, bless his soul, would bring fresh produce to the town market. Such a hard worker, that man. I wonder what he'd think about all this." Noah's fist tightened on his lap, but he forced himself to stay composed. "I appreciate your concern, Ms. Price, but I've got it under control." She chuckled, a sound that grated against his already raw nerves. Of course. Well, I suppose if things don't work out, there's always a place for you in town. I hear the hardware store's hiring." With that, she straightened up and sauntered back to her car, leaving Noah sitting in the cab, his dignity crumbling under the weight of her words. He watched her drive away, her taillights disappearing into the horizon, and felt an ache deep in his chest. He wasn't sure if it was anger, shame, or both. Returning home that evening, Noah found Clara waiting on the porch, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. The worry etched into her face mirrored his own. He walked up the steps and kissed her forehead, but the words he wanted to say stuck in his throat. "Anything?" she asked softly. "No," he admitted, his voice heavy with defeat. "They won't give me more time." Clara reached out, placing a hand on his arm. "We'll figure something out. We always do." Noah nodded, though he wasn't sure he believed it. As he stepped into their home, the worn floorboards creaking beneath his feet, he realized that the fight ahead would test him in ways he never imagined. For the first time, doubt crept into his resolve, threatening to drown the hope that had always been his anchor. Noah sat at the kitchen table late into the evening, the hum of the overhead light, the only sound breaking the heavy silence. His hands cradled a mug of coffee that had long gone cold. Across from him, Clara folded the same dish towel over and over, her nervous energy manifesting in small, repetitive motions. "We'll find a way, Noah," she said softly, her eyes searching his. "We always do." Noah nodded but didn't reply. The weight of the day had settled into his bones and every possible solution felt just out of reach. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. He frowned, glancing at the clock. It was nearly 9 too late for visitors. He rose from his chair as the sound of heels clicked against the gravel path. Through the window, he caught sight of a tall woman with sharp features stepping out of a sleek black car. She was dressed in a navy blue suit, her briefcase clutched tightly in one hand. Noah exchanged a wary glance with Clara before heading to the door. When he opened it, the woman extended a hand, her movements crisp and professional. "Mr. Carter, I presume? I'm Evelyn Johnson." Noah hesitated before shaking her hand. "Evening, ma'am. What brings you out here so late?" "I represent the law firm of Turner and Associates," she said, glancing briefly at Clara, who had joined Noah in the doorway. "May I come in? I have some important matters to discuss with you." Noah stepped aside, motioning her in. Evelyn entered, her gaze sweeping the modest home. She moved toward the table, setting her briefcase down with a precision that spoke to years of practice. Noah and Clara followed, taking their seats as Evelyn opened her case and pulled out a thick manila envelope. "I won't keep you in suspense," Evelyn began, her tone businesslike. "I'm here on behalf of your great-uncle, Henry Carter." Noah blinked, confusion crossing his face. "Henry Carter? I don't reckon I know any Henry Carter." "That's not surprising," Evelyn replied, pulling out several documents. "He was estranged from the family for many years. He moved out west decades ago and became quite successful. When he passed recently, he left a substantial estate." Noah exchanged a glance with Clara, his brow furrowed. "What does that have to do with me?" Evelyn smiled faintly, pushing a document toward him. "You're his sole heir." The words hung in the air, almost incomprehensible. Noah leaned forward, his hands trembling slightly as he picked up the paper. Clara placed a hand on his shoulder, her grip firm and grounding. "I don't understand," Noah said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why me?" Evelyn's gaze softened slightly. "From what I've gathered, Henry regretted the distance he kept from his family. He admired the way you upheld the Carter name, even from afar. This was his way of making amends." Noah sat back, stunned. "And how much are we talking about?" Evelyn folded her hands neatly on the table. "The total estate value is roughly $2.5 million. That includes several properties and investments." Clara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Noah, however, didn't speak. His mind raced, trying to reconcile the impossible news with the reality of his circumstances. A lifetime of struggle and sacrifice had taught him to be wary of good fortune, and this felt almost too good to be true. "What's the catch?" he asked finally, his voice steady but skeptical. "No catch," Evelyn assured him. "I've brought all the necessary paperwork. You simply need to sign, and the estate is yours to manage as you see fit." Noah stared at the papers in front of him. The promises they held seemed both liberating and terrifying. Clara squeezed his shoulder, her eyes brimming with cautious hope. "This could save the farm, Noah," she whispered. Evelyn nodded. "It could do much more than that. It could secure your family's future." Noah inhaled deeply, his fingers brushing the edge of the document. The thought of clearing his debts and investing in the farm, of finally holding his head high in town, was almost overwhelming, but with it came the weight of responsibility, of making choices that would honor his family's legacy. "I need time to think," he said finally, meeting Evelyn's gaze. "Of course," she replied, rising from her seat. "Take the night. I'll return tomorrow." Noah and Clara walked her to the door, thanking her before watching her car disappear down the road. As they stood on the porch, the cool night air wrapped around them, filled with the hum of crickets. "What do you think?" Noah Clara asked softly. He didn't answer immediately, his eyes fixed on the horizon where Evelyn's car had vanished. "I think this changes everything." Inside, as Noah sat back at the kitchen table, the envelope in front of him felt like both a lifeline and a test. He wasn't just inheriting wealth, he was inheriting a chance to rewrite his story and the story of the Carter farm. The next morning, Noah stood on his porch, staring out at the fields bathed in early sunlight. The envelope containing the inheritance papers sat on the table inside, untouched since the night before. He had spent hours poring over the documents, his mind oscillating between hope and fear. Now, he had made his decision. By mid-morning, news had already spread through the town like wildfire. It began with Evelyn's return to finalize the paperwork, her shiny black car drawing attention as it sat in Noah's driveway. By noon, whispers and speculation had consumed the town. People gathered in small groups outside the diner, the hardware store, and the post office, their conversations buzzing with curiosity. Noah Carter? The black farmer? Inherited millions, someone muttered. Can you believe it? After all these years, who would have thought? But not everyone took the news with grace. At the bank, Mr. Thompson slammed his pen down on his desk, his face red with frustration as a clerk relayed the latest gossip. "I don't care what he inherited," Thompson barked. "He's still behind on his payments, and that farm won't sustain itself." Others were more strategic in their reactions. Evelyn Price, the woman who had mocked Noah the day before, now found herself outside his farm, her impeccable outfit replaced with what she likely thought was down-to-earth attire. She held a basket of muffins, her carefully practiced smile in place. "Noah," she called sweetly as she walked up the driveway. "I thought I'd stop by to say congratulations." Noah stepped out of the barn, wiping his hands on a rag, his expression unreadable. "Miss Price," he said, nodding slightly. "I brought muffins," she chirped, thrusting the basket toward him. "Homemade, of course. I just couldn't believe the news when I heard. What a blessing for you and Clara." Noah glanced at the basket and then back at Evelyn, his lips twitching into the faintest hint of a smirk. "That's mighty kind of you, but we don't take handouts, Ms. Price." Her smile faltered, but she recovered quickly. "Oh, it's no trouble at all. I was just thinking about all the wonderful things you could do for the town now with your newfound resources. You know, donations, improvements, that sort of thing." Noah leaned against the barn door, folding his arms. "Funny, Ms. Price. Yesterday, you didn't seem too concerned about my resources. What's changed?" Evelyn blinked, her face flushing as she stumbled for a response. "Well, of course I care about the community. I've always cared." Noah's gaze didn't waver, and after an awkward moment, Evelyn muttered something about needing to get back to town. She walked briskly to her car, leaving the basket of muffins on the ground. As she drove away, Clara stepped out onto the porch, her arms crossed. "That woman doesn't know when to quit," she said, shaking her head. Noah chuckled. "Let her talk. They all will. It's what they do best." But the murmurs and speculation didn't stop at town gossip. By the afternoon, several other townsfolk arrived at Noah's farm, each with their own agendas. Some brought offers to buy parts of his land, while others hinted at partnerships. Noah handled each interaction with quiet patience, listening carefully but making no promises. Later that day, Thomas Reed stopped by, his expression wary but warm. "Heard you had some excitement," he said, leaning against the fence as Noah worked in the field. "You could say that," Noah replied, straightening up. Thomas hesitated before continuing. "Look, I know you've been dealt a tough hand for a long time, but this could change things for you. Just don't let them pressure you into something that doesn't feel right." Noah nodded, appreciating Thomas's honesty. "Don't worry, Thomas. I've learned a thing or two about pressure over the years." By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, the farm was quiet again. Noah sat on the porch with Clara, the events of the day replaying in his mind. Despite the excitement, the newfound attention left him uneasy. He had spent years being underestimated, dismissed, and mocked. Now, the same people who had doubted him wanted a piece of his success. "I don't trust half of them," Clara said, echoing his thoughts. "They didn't care before, and they won't care now." Noah sighed, leaning back in his chair. It's not about them, Clara. It's about what we do next. This money, it's not just for us. It's a chance to make something better for our farm, for this community, for the people who've always stood by us. Clara reached over, placing her hand on his. You'll figure it out, Noah, you always do. As the stars began to pepper the night sky, Noah felt the weight of his decision settle more firmly on his shoulders. The inheritance had given him a platform, but it was up to him to decide how to use it. The whispers and gossip would fade in time, but the legacy he built now could last for generations. The next morning, Noah rose with the sun, his resolve firm. He dressed in his usual work clothes, worn jeans, a faded button-down, and his favorite wide-brimmed hat. The farm was quiet, the early light casting long shadows across the fields. He stood at the edge of his property, taking in the sight of the land that had shaped his family's story. This was where it all began, and now it was where everything would change. By mid-morning, Noah was back in town, a determined look on his face. Main Street bustled with activity as he strode past the diner and hardware store. People paused in their tracks, whispering as he passed. Some nodded respectfully, others stared, but Noah paid them no mind. He had an appointment to keep. He entered the town hall, the air inside cooler and quieter than the streets outside. A young receptionist looked up from her desk, startled. Mr. Carter, how can I help you? I'd like to speak with Mayor Jenkins, Noah said evenly. Moments later, he was ushered into the mayor's office. Mayor Jenkins, an older man with a rounded frame and a perpetually harried expression, looked up in surprise. Noah Carter, to what do I owe the pleasure? Noah removed his hat and stepped forward. I want to discuss a proposal, he said, his voice steady but firm. He placed a folder on the mayor's desk, filled with documents Evelyn Johnson had helped him prepare. This town has been struggling, and I think it's time we did something about it. The mayor opened the folder, his eyes scanning the pages. A community development project. That's right, Noah replied. I want to use part of my inheritance to fund programs that'll benefit everyone. Scholarships for the kids, grants for small businesses, repairs to the school and library. Mayor Jenkins leaned back, his eyes narrowing slightly. That's a generous offer, Noah. But why? After all the town's put you through. Noah's jaw tightened, but he held his composure. Because this town isn't just about its worst moments. It's about its people, people like Thomas Reed, who's always lent a hand, and Clara, who stood by me through everything. It's about giving back and building something that lasts. The mayor's skepticism gave way to a nod of respect. All right, Noah, I'll bring this to the town council. Noah shook his hand firmly before leaving the office. Outside, the sun was high, and the whispers of the townsfolk had grown louder. Word of his plan spread quickly, and soon, the mood in town began to shift. Some were impressed, others suspicious, but all were curious. Back at the farm, Noah gathered his workers and family to discuss his plans. The barn, usually filled with the hum of machinery, now echoed with their voices. This inheritance is more than just money, Noah began, standing in the center of the room. It's a chance to turn things around for the farm, for this town, for us. But it's going to take work, and it's going to take all of us. Clara stood beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm. We've always known how to work, Noah, she said with a small smile. This won't be any different. The group nodded, their expressions a mix of determination and hope. For the first time in years, Noah felt a flicker of something he hadn't dared to feel in a long time: optimism. In the weeks that followed, Noah threw himself into action. He met with contractors to begin renovations on the school and library, hired local farmers to help restore the land, and organized town hall meetings to gather input on other community projects. His presence in town became a constant, and slowly the whispers of doubt began to fade. Not everyone was supportive, of course. Mr. Thompson, the bank manager, remained skeptical, dismissing Noah's efforts as a publicity stunt. Evelyn Price made a point of showing up at every event, her compliments dripping with insincerity. But Noah refused to be deterred. One afternoon, as he supervised the clearing of an overgrown lot for a new community garden, Thomas Reed approached him, wiping sweat from his brow. "You're really doing it," Noah Thomas said, his tone filled with admiration. Noah smiled faintly, leaning on his shovel. It's not just me. It's everyone who's willing to believe in something better. Thomas nodded, clapping him on the shoulder. You're a good man, Noah. Don't let anyone tell you different. The turning point came during the groundbreaking ceremony for the new library. The entire town gathered to watch as Noah, with Clara at his side, planted the first shovel into the earth. Cheers erupted, the sound echoing across the square. For the first time in years, Noah felt the weight of his struggles begin to lift. As he stood there, surrounded by the people who had doubted him, supported him, and everything in between, he realized that the fight had been worth it. This wasn't just about saving the farm, it was about building a future that honored the past while forging a new path. Weeks turned into months, and Noah's vision for the town began to take shape. The old library, once a neglected building with broken windows and sagging shelves, now stood proud and restored. Its freshly painted walls gleamed in the sunlight, and a new sign above the door read Carter Memorial Library, Knowledge for All. Inside, shelves brimmed with books, and a computer lab offered free access to technology for students and residents. Across town, the community garden flourished. Rows of vegetables and flowers thrived under the care of volunteers, many of whom had never farmed before. Children raced along the neat paths, their laughter filling the air as they learned to plant seeds and nurture growth. The garden had become a symbol of renewal, a shared space where everyone contributed and reaped the rewards. One crisp autumn morning, Noah stood on the edge of his field, surveying the land with a quiet pride. The farm was alive again, its soil rich and its crops abundant. The sound of machinery hummed in the distance as workers harvested rows of corn and wheat. Noah's heart swelled at the sight. For so long, this land had felt like a burden, but now it was a testament to resilience and hard work. Clara joined him, her arm linking through his. It's beautiful, isn't it? She said softly. Noah nodded, a rare smile spreading across his face. It is. Took a long time to get here, but we made it. Clara squeezed his arm, her eyes misty. You made it, Noah. You never gave up, even when it felt impossible. They stood in silence for a moment, the morning breeze carrying the scent of earth and possibility. Then, from the distance, the sound of a car approaching drew their attention. A sleek black sedan rolled up the driveway, and Evelyn Johnson stepped out, her heels clicking against the gravel. Noah, she called, waving as she approached. I wanted to stop by and give you an update. He met her halfway, shaking her hand. What's the news, Ms. Johnson? Evelyn smiled, holding up a folder. The scholarship program is fully funded, and applications are pouring in. We've already awarded grants to several local businesses, and the town council is considering additional projects for next year. Noah's smile widened. That's good to hear. Real good. Evelyn glanced past him at Clara and the fields beyond. You've done something incredible here, Noah. This town is changing, and it's because of you. Noah shook his head. It's because people came together. I just gave them a reason to. Evelyn's eyes softened. Don't sell yourself short. What you've built here is rare, and it's something people will remember. As Evelyn drove away, Noah returned to the porch, where Clara waited with a steaming cup of coffee. He sat beside her, taking the cup and letting its warmth seep into his hands. Later that day, the town gathered for a celebration in the square. A stage had been set up, adorned with ribbons and banners. People milled about, laughing and chatting as music played in the background. Noah, dressed in his best Sunday clothes, stood near the stage, greeting familiar faces and shaking hands. When it was time, the mayor stepped onto the stage, a microphone in hand. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice echoing through the square. Today we celebrate not just the progress of our town, but the spirit of one man who reminded us what's possible when we work together. The crowd erupted in applause as Noah stepped up, tipping his hat in thanks. He took the microphone, glancing out at the sea of faces, some familiar, some new, all united in a way he'd never thought possible. This isn't about me, Noah said, his voice steady. It's about us. This town has been through hard times, and there were days I thought we'd never see better ones. But we did. We stood together, we worked together, and now we're building something better for ourselves and for the next generation. The crowd cheered, the sound ringing with genuine admiration and respect. Noah felt his throat tighten as he looked out at the people who had once doubted him, who now celebrated him. For the first time, he felt not just accepted but embraced. That evening, as the festivities wound down, Noah and Clara returned to the farm. The stars above were brighter than ever, their light casting a soft glow over the fields. They sat on the porch, the hum of crickets filling the night air. "You did good," Noah Clara said, her voice warm with pride. He took her hand, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "We did good, Clara, all of us." The land stretched out before them, no longer a burden, but a promise, a legacy of hope, resilience, and renewal. For the first time in years, Noah felt at peace, knowing that the future was as boundless as the fields he had fought so hard to save.